So in graduate school, I started taking classes in philosophy of science, met a wonderful professor, Peter Gallison, who was a historian of science, which I didn't know that history of science existed as a field, and that was my eureka moment. Well, I've had a fun career. I am really glad about all the things I've done. So I started as a geologist. I went into geology because I liked science, but I hated pre-meds. And because I loved being outdoors, the obvious choice for me was to go into geology. So I became a geologist, and my first real job was working in Australia, in South Australia, based in Adelaide, but working in the northern part of South Australia as an exploration geologist. And that was an absolutely great experience, totally unforgettable, and I still have lots of great friends in South Australia. I like to say I like going back to Australia because I feel like I'm a more fun person when I hang out with my Australian mates. We had a great time. It was a great job. I loved what I did. And then I came, but I was always interested in a lot of other things. I was always one of these people for whom, like, I picked geology because it was fun and I got to be outside, but I had a lot of other interests as well, and I have always loved reading fiction. I've always been interested in politics. I've always been interested in the question of how to understand science in relation to society, and how to understand how scientists know the things they know, or how they decide that, yes, I have enough evidence to say that I believe this. Because, you know, here's the interesting thing about science. We'll say it's evidence-based, we collect all this data, okay, but then what? There's this sort of, you know, leap of something. I mean, some scientists in the early 20th century used to call it the inductive leap, right? That you have all this data and evidence, but somehow you still have to get from there to your general beliefs about the world. And how does that happen? So in graduate school, I started taking classes in philosophy of science, met a wonderful professor, Peter Gallison, who was a historian of science, which I didn't know that history of science existed as a field. And that was my eureka moment, because then I discovered there was a field where all these disparate or seemingly disparate interests of mine, which I used to think of as a problem. Like, I had this problem that I was interested in too many different things. Suddenly it wasn't a problem. Suddenly it was like, oh, this is good. This is good. And you like to read and you like to write and you're interested in politics and science, and here's a field where all that is good. So I ended up moving into history of science as a profession.